I work in a clinical setting. I see a lot of people with depression, and I've found that some things are better than others in order to treat it and to identify what are the signs. Because in psychology, the biggest part of our treatment is actually being able to diagnose something and identify. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about how we can all do that for oneself, but also for others, which is very, very important, because once we know, then we can do something about it. Like the great Plato, the philosopher from ancient Greece, said, knowledge is power, my friend. So it's still a goodie, and although it's quite old. So knowledge is very important. That's why today we're going to break it down into some very, very basic type of scenarios. I just want to quickly define depression, because a lot of people talk about it, but not everyone knows exactly what it means. It's important to differentiate depression from sadness. We all feel sad. That's a given. It's part of life. There's two things that make up life. It's like two ingredients. And one is happiness, the other one is sadness. You can't escape it. Nobody can, regardless of gender, class, money, wisdom, whatever it may be, culture. There's always a time that we're going to feel sad, but it's not necessarily depression. When we talk about clinical depression, we look at the intensity, we look at the time frame, how long it lasts, and we also look at how deep the person can get into depression, but also how quick they can come out of it. So a lot of us do feel depressed, and there's times in life where we will. Things happen in our life, and of course there's going to be issues that we all have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Usually those things we recover from, and we tend to be able to continue our life as per normal. People that suffer from depression find it very difficult. Things may be fantastic, but yet there's something not allowing them to be happy, and therefore a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a counsellor, a social worker may look at the symptoms of depression, and there's many ways of treating it which we'll go into. So that's a slight difference. Yes, we all get sad. Not all of us suffer from depression though. So this is really about the more clinical part of depression. And of course, a lot of us have actually suffered from depression, and maybe just a one-off. Maybe it lasted a day, maybe it lasted a week, maybe a little bit longer. Maybe it came in and went over a period of time when things weren't that well, or maybe we just were unsettled. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're born with depression. We definitely have a disposition to have depression. In psychology, we call it disposition, yeah? It's a little bit of the chance of having something, the potential, if you like, of having something. But depending on situations, it may or may not develop. And just like negative things like depression, there's also positive things that may not develop. We all might have the potential to be a great writer or a netballer or a politician, which we need good ones now. And we find that maybe we didn't take our chances, or maybe we didn't have the opportunity to develop that. So in life, there are potentials. We call them dispositions in biology and psychology. So yes, some people are more prone, if you like, to depression. So that's the little definition I like to start off with. But the beauty of psychology and all humanities is that it's still open for discussion. I don't have a blueprint for depression or any type of human behavior or condition, and therefore I'm just going to stick to the facts, and we are all capable of interpreting different ways. And that's the beauty of art and all the humanities, that we all have our subjective input. So this is a little bit of a framework with regards to facts, but we can't get away from my own subjectivity. So you may speak to another psychologist and they may have a different point of view, but I stick to pretty much what I find that works, and some practical advice that you can all take with you today. So, all right, so we need to identify first, and that's one of the things that us psychologists and psychiatrists find it quite difficult. Sometimes it takes time to identify certain aspects of someone. And of course, looking at identifying symptoms of depression can be quite tricky because of what we just said. People feel sad, and life is made up by sadness and happiness, a combination of both, if you like. Suffering and triumphs, I suppose, there's always those opposites in life that we're all prone to, regardless, as we said, who we are. So we just got to be careful not to jump to conclusion. But it's better to err in the side of being a little bit conservative, because if you find, especially if you see that one of your sons, your daughters, whether they're teenagers, children, your father, your mother has changed in the last little while or are behaving a little bit different, maybe it's a good opportunity to use these skills and recommend certain things rather than leaving it too long. It's always best to intervene as quickly as possible. We know that in medicine, without a doubt, it's always best. So it's no different with depression. Identifying, okay, one of the big things that comes across, let's talk about other people first and then we'll talk about ourselves, which is much harder, of course, when we try to analyse ourselves because we're living inside our own body and some of the things we do come natural. And so they don't seem out of place. But when someone else approaches us, especially when we know them well and they are behaving or talking differently, doing things differently, then that does stand out. So that's a good place to start, I find, with others. And as a psychologist, I have the opportunity to practice this pretty much every day. So it becomes natural. And we're all psychologists in a way. We all have the ability to analyse others. And we've all done it. I'm sure all of you out there have met someone and immediately have come to the conclusion that they may be like this, they may not be like that, or they might not be the right person to hang around with, or the contrary, they might be lovely and we know we're going to be friends forever. We've all had those experiences in life. So in a way, we're all in tune. We are less so today in the modern world because of other more complex situations we won't go into today. But a lot of us have untuned ourselves from that initial intuition. It's important to tune ourselves back into it because intuition is always right, my friends, most of the time anyway. And it's always good to have that radar in order to know where we're standing and whether we're going to spend time with others or not. With regards to people we know their type of behaviour. People change throughout time, but usually when there's a drastic change, one is, of course, the time that they want to spend with others. If people you find are isolating themselves, they're a bit withdrawn, we say in psychology, which pretty much means that they like spending time on their own. That's already something to think about. They may be an introverted person, so it may be more difficult for us to pick up on, but usually there's a certain type of withdrawal because that's linked to something else, which is they stop doing things they actually liked. So it's not so much wanting to be on their own because they're introverted and they like their own company, but it's also them ceasing from doing activities that were once of great value to them. And so that's a very important one too. When we see that the people that we know decide to avoid those situations, then that's another one. So there's two there. And so that's immediate because that relates to us and their social environment as well. Another thing is, which is important when they do talk to us, to study their mood, whether they look a little bit flat, but also anger can be a big sign and a significant symptom of depression because people that are depressed are not always just down and flat. They sometimes react quite violently, not in the physical sense, but towards their environment because they don't want to be there. They don't want to do things. They don't want to talk. They don't want to be involved. So the way they are communicating, if it's a little bit more serious, a bit rougher, so to speak, towards us and towards others, that's always a significant sign for us to keep in mind. That's a little bit of a social thing that we can look at. Also, we can study as well some of the words that people use. People that suffer from depression become a little bit more negative, of course. There is negativity, there's pessimism, and there's depression. And they're all related, of course, but some people are very, very happy people and they're quite negative and pessimistic because they would say they're realists, but they're not depressed. They would say they love life and so forth, but they feel that life is a certain way or they have no real optimism for the human race and so forth. That might just be a philosophy of life. So that's quite different. But when someone is always negative, pessimistic of their own chances of success and so forth. That's always a good sign that they might be depressed. It's also a sign of their self-esteem, of course, which is correlated with depression. So negative terms, always look out for that. That's very, very important. Negative terms that people use. I think another one, which is quite convenient for us who are parents or grandparents, if our kids, if the young people are sleeping too long, that's also an important sign. Not wanting to get out of bed, preferring to stay in bed, staying up late usually, and getting up late in the morning. Getting up late in the morning is a very significant sign of depression, actually, for anyone. So if you know anyone that just gets up late and has told you, look, I've tried to get up early and I can't, they might not even know they're depressed, but they just want to stay in bed. The less that they're awake and facing the world, the better in a way. They don't know that, of course. That's an unconscious reaction. So getting up late is very, very significant. Also, the lack of exercise, them avoiding situations where they have to use up energy. It could be going dancing, it could be going to where they need to invest a bit of physical energy. Their diet changes sometimes as well. We have to make sure that it's not on purpose, that they're not eating certain things or they're not eating well. Good sign, actually, of someone that's healthy is that they have a well-structured diet. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're trying to lose weight. They just eat at certain times, they eat certain things, they don't eat certain things on a regular basis. The odd time, of course, we all have to end up eating something we don't want because most of the things that may not be open, so we end up going into fast food places and so forth. That's okay every now and then, I suppose. The increase of alcohol is another one if people are increasing in alcohol, and of course if there's any issues with to a place recreational and illegal drugs, that's also a concern all the time, regardless whether they are depressed. And I can assure you, long-term use of alcohol and recreational drugs leads almost unavoidably to depression, regardless of the person's personality, almost unavoidably, because of the change of the chemistry in the brain. So there are the few things that we have, and I think they're good ones that we can all look at. There's a few other ones that are a bit more complex, and I think we'll leave that for another time, where we might do another little talk where we go into a bit more on the clinical aspects of how a psychologist would look at. But I think for us that are just looking at friends and family, people around us, loved ones and work colleagues, I think it's important that we know exactly what we're looking for, and we simplify. It could be a combination of all those, or it just could be one of those that's intense. So just keep an eye out on that. Very, very important. With regards to ourselves, just quickly, I think the best one to start off with is listening to our language. I think we talked about people being negative. If we find that other people are telling us that we're a little bit negative, we sound pessimistic, that we don't like anything, we're always rejecting things or being contradictory or finding that our vocabulary has changed, that seems a bit negative, that's something for us to work on. Because we also, if we were not feeling depressed, we're also, in a way, trying not to depress others, which is very, very important in life. I think we all have the ability when we meet someone to command, if you like, happiness just by the things we say. So don't underestimate the words that we use to others and how we use them. Very, very important. For ourselves as well, we need to look at the time we get up, have a strict time between Sunday and Thursday night to get up, which we'll look at now when we're looking at coping mechanisms. And obviously moderate any intake of alcohol and drugs, preferably none if possible, but I understand some people enjoy a drink every now and then. If they're adults and they're doing it moderately, that's okay, as long as they're doing it for the right reasons, and we're doing it for the right reasons, because we're enjoying what we're doing, not because it's pressure or because we're trying to fall asleep. If we are, then that means we have a sleep problem, which may be connected to depression. So they're the couple of things for ourselves, which is important, our language and our bed routine. I think those two things are plenty for now, because it's very complex analysing oneself. And if we go too much into it, you'll end up not having any information, because it's important just to start with the basics. Sleep routine, language. What I do, I've got a little trick. It's almost like I don't know if any of you have ever participated in a play, community play. I was fortunate enough to do a bit. And you study your lines and the curtain opens, you come out, you become someone else. It's a little bit like that. I've tried that before. I've gone to parties, or before this Zoom meeting, I've decided, okay, I've got to be the psychologist now. I've got to talk about this. I've got to regulate my language. And in a way, you might bump into me at a football stadium and I might be talking very, very differently because it's obvious we adapt to different situations, but we can use that in our favour. That's what actors do. They can convince their brain of certain things. So you might not want to go somewhere, but just try it. Just tell yourself, okay, initially I didn't want to go this, but you know what? I'm going to go there. I'm going to have a fantastic time, and I'm going to be positive. I'm going to be optimistic, and this is the type of language I'm going to use. And you remind yourself, you get into character, and if you do the opposite, if you say, look, I'm not going to enjoy this is terrible, I don't even want to meet that person, I can guarantee you that both are going to come out true. So the power of self-conviction and almost like a little bit of self-hypnosis, meditation that I call it, is important to set ourselves up for what we want. That's the beauty of the brain, we can adapt. So there are 2 or 3 little things for ourselves for now.